Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we're going to be talking about your love life and your financial life for the month of May. Now this video is like a part 2 to my first predictions video, where we really talked about the general month of May for you and what's going to be happening on your daily life. However, in this video, we're going to talk about the major event that is happening in May, which is Venus going retrograde. So that's a very sticky energy. It's also going to be squaring Neptune 2 different times during the month. So there's this really significant energy pertaining to our relationships, pertaining to our financial life, pertaining to our money and love and all those things that Venus does represent. So we're really going to unpack what's going to happen for your specific zodiac sign and really help to prepare for this energy we do have to navigate in May. So make sure you watch your May prediction video, the first part of this video, for this video to make more sense and you get a whole picture of your month of May if you watch the first video and this video afterwards. So as always, you guys can watch this video for your rising sign, which will be the most accurate manifestation of this prediction, and then you can watch it for your moon sign and then your sun sign if you wish. And then you can also watch it for all three of those if you want like a whole picture of your month, but rising sign will be the most accurate. And so yeah, let's just get into this video. Hey Pisces, so let's get started on your prediction for the month of May, and we're going to talk about how your love life and your financial life is affected by the major events happening in May. So speaking of events, let's start with the dates of these major events that are happening. So first things first, Venus is going retrograde. So Venus goes retrograde on May 13th, 2020. I'll put it on the screen so you guys get a visual. I'll also be posting these dates and updates on my Instagram at AstroKit, so you guys can follow that for daily updates and so you can screenshot stuff. And so Venus goes retrograde in Gemini on May 13th. So this is a really significant thing, and we're going to unpack what that means for you, Pisces, from the perspective of love and money. Now, I already did your general prediction for the month of May, so you guys can watch that video, which was the first video I posted on my channel. And then this one is just about love and money. So that's the major date to look out for, is May 13th, when Venus does go retrograde. And then Venus actually squares Neptune, which is a really huge event. And it's going to square Neptune first on May 3rd, so pretty soon. It's going to pretty much square Neptune in the beginning of the month, and then it's going to square Neptune again on May 20th. So we're going to talk about that Venus-Neptune square. We're going to talk about that Venus retrograde in terms of your love life and your financial life, and those are the dates to really look out for. So of course, as you guys know, Venus does represent love and relationships, which I feel like most people already know that, but Venus also represents money and finances too, which is a really key part of our lives. And so Venus going retrograde represents the sense of reassessing our finances, reassessing how we spend money, and literally reviewing our finances. It's not really a good time to spend a lot of money. It's not a good time to start new financial endeavors or invest in things. Venus retrograde is more about reflecting on our money, not really initiating new financial projects and spending a lot of money. So that's the key thing to look out for with Venus in retrograde, is not really doing too much when it comes to money, because it kind of backfires when it's in retrograde, right? So let's get started. So Venus is going retrograde into your 4th house, and it's going to square Neptune, which is in your 1st house, Pisces. So this is really significant for you, and I have your birth chart yet again. This one is more neat than the other video, I hope. So as you guys can see, May 2020, love and money, and we're talking about Pisces. Let me write your name. So Pisces. There you go. So Pisces chart is right here. So Neptune is actually sitting in your 1st house right now. So Neptune has been sitting there, I think, for like the past year or so. Neptune transits are pretty long. So Neptune's going to sit in your house for a few years. So that's not really anything that's changing anytime soon. But Venus is sitting down here. So I'll draw that out for you, Venus. Okay, so Venus is sitting right here, and those two things are squaring each other on May 3rd and then again on May 20th. So Venus going retrograde in your 4th house, this represents you spending your money on things related to home, things related to securing your future. There's really a huge theme of security when it comes to Venus retrograde into your 4th house. And the biggest question you're going to be reflecting on, and the biggest thing you're going to be thinking about when it comes to money and this Venus in retrograde, is is this worth spending money on? You're really going to be thinking about that question very actively. Is this thing that I bought, is it worth the money I spent on it? Is, this experience I bought, is this thing that I bought for someone else, is it really worth spending money on? And so, like I said in the beginning of this video, when it comes to retrograde and Venus retrograde, it's all about reflection. It's not about spending money. It's not about investing in new things. In fact, it's really advised against to spend a lot of money or like start new financial projects. You're not really supposed to do that when Venus is retrograde, right? Because it kind of backfires on you. So during this point in time, with especially a fourth house Venus, it's like you're really focused on financial security. That's the key word here, because fourth house does represent security. It represents home, and it also represents the past as well. So when it comes to money, you're really going to be reflecting on how you spent your money in the past. And again, this key question you're really thinking about is this worth spending money on? So because of that question, you're going to be inspired to save your money in May. You're really focused on securing the bag, right? Fourth house is security, and then Venus is money. So it's like literally in May, you're securing your bag and you're really thinking about your future, right? I feel like fourth house is such a foundational house where we really think about foundations and security. And when it comes to money, you're going to be invested in thinking about how you can create a better future financially for yourself, and really sitting down and thinking about like, okay, here's what my 5-year plan is, and here's my budget for that. I feel like Pisces is going to be budgeting a lot in May, and it's kind of advisable to do that in May just so you can sort your finances out, reflect on how you spend money. And I feel like you're going to look back at how you spent money in the past and be like, okay, I don't need to spend thousands of dollars on this thing. I don't need to spend hundreds of dollars on this thing. You're really refining your spending habits and prioritizing what needs to be spent and investing in a more financially stable future. And on a more mundane level, like I said, fourth house is about home. So you could be saving for a home, saving for an apartment, saving for some sort of move if you want to move in the future. Either way, May is the month where you're really like, okay, I'm getting serious. I want to save for this. I want to stop spending money on this. And I want to be more wise about how I spend my money. So Neptune, as you guys can see, it's in your first house right now, which is kind of a hard transit. And I'll be honest with you guys, Neptune, people romanticize Neptune so much in astrology. I feel like people talk about Neptune as if it's like some romantic spiritual planet, but honestly, Neptune is quite malefic. Neptune doesn't really bring anything good in the birth chart, right? Neptune causes confusion, it causes illusions. Nothing about Neptune brings good results, if that makes sense. Even though I feel like it's heavily romanticized, which is very on brand for Neptune, it's not really a positive planet. The fact that it squares your Venus, it really causes you to maybe spend money in a way that isn't kind of conducive to your future. Fourth house is opposite the 10th house, and 10th house is the future, right? Fourth house is the past. And so with Neptune squaring the fourth house, it's kind of like it causes this illusion and confusion around money, and it might make you want to spend money on things that are illusionary, I guess. You might spend money on things that are illusions because you don't have that clarity when it comes to money. So the fact that the Venus is retrograde and it's squaring Neptune, there's this huge lack of clarity with money for you and a lot of confusion when it comes to finances. And that's why I say it's better to save money and be more practical about it in May, because Neptune's going to challenge that. Neptune wants you to kind of invest yourself into some illusion that isn't really real. And fourth house is about what is real. It's about what is concrete, and Neptune is the opposite of that. So be careful when it comes to money and being confused about it, and don't spend too much money in May. That's the biggest thing. If there's any advice in this video, is don't spend too much money, or don't spend money on things that are kind of silly. And Neptune does represent glamour as well. So glamour involves hair, makeup, stuff like that. So maybe don't overspend on things that involve glamour, because it might end up in a loss for you. Neptune does rule losses as well. And financial loss is on the cards for you if you don't really play into your larger goals, if you don't play into the security and safety factor of this fourth house Venus. That's Venus in retrograde and how it will affect your money. But now let's talk about love. Let's talk about how this Venus in retrograde affects your love life and how it affects your relationships overall. Venus is the planet of relationships, it's the planet of love. So when it comes to your relationships, there is this really huge turning point in your life. So of course, as you guys can see, Venus is still going retrograde in your 4th house. And what does 4th house represent? It represents family. So when it comes to your relationships, you're really contemplating and reflecting on the relationship with your family. And this is very significant for you because in the last video, we really talked about how you might be reflecting on your past during May, how you might feel like May is sort of like a retrograde for you because you're really submerged in these past subconscious events, this past subconscious trauma. And so you're really contemplating how that might be relevant to your family. Maybe you experience that with your family, or especially like your mother figure. 4th house is the mother, literally grandmother. Any type of mother, feminine figure in your life is seen by the 4th house. So with Venus retrograde here, maybe you're reflecting on the relationship with your mother, the relationship with your family overall, and how that's contributed to your evolution as a person. And I will say the major question you're asking yourself with Venus retrograde in the 4th house as it pertains to relationships is that you're really asking yourself, is this relationship worth holding on to? In May, I see you guys really contemplating your past relationships, and really once you get a good perspective on the past, you're really able to move forward more productively. And so I feel like you're really almost calling out, or really confronting the baggage you might have kind of generated with your relationships and kind of releasing that in May. And I feel like you're releasing a lot of people in your life, and some of those people might be family members. Let's be honest. Family members can be toxic as well, and it's not always the case where everyone in your family is conducive to your growth and want to see you grow and be happy and healthy. That's just the truth. So maybe you're kind of confronting some family members. Although I don't see you really confronting them directly, I see you kind of letting them go if you need to. Maybe you cut off contact with your mom, or maybe a feminine figure, or anyone in your family that's not conducive to your future. 10th house, which is up here, you're going to cut them off. And anyone from the past that tries to contact you and be, I don't know, I feel like Neptune squaring Venus too is like people coming from the past and trying to offer you some illusion or sell you some sort of dream. But don't listen to them because they don't really have your best interest at heart, to be honest. They just want to sell you some illusion or dream, and they don't really want to see you succeed at all. So be really wary of that Neptune squaring Venus, which is happening on May 3rd and then again on May 20th, because it represents people from the past really trying to kind of deceive you or lie to you. And also this is a time where you're realizing where you've been lied to in your life, where you've been deceived in your life. Maybe you've been deceived by your own family. That's a thing too. So you're really kind of contemplating that, and that's a really heavy thing to deal with. And like I talked about in your last video, you're dealing with a lot of subconscious trauma and subconscious baggage that you never really confronted. So May is the month where you're really confronting that subconscious trauma as it pertains to relationships, and specifically this can be relationships with your family. And so when it comes to like your love life, it's not really emphasized in May. I feel like the whole relationship aspect is more emphasized on your family dynamics, not really like love partnership. But when it does come to love partnerships, I do see you reflecting on past love partnerships, and maybe, like I said, how you were lied to, how you were deceived. Neptune represents lying and deception. Like I said, Neptune isn't really benefic. Neptune is kind of a malefic planet, even though it's really romanticized. So Neptune really wants to lie to you, wants to deceive you, and so expect, reflection on maybe love partnerships where you were lied to and where you were deceived. And so you're really ending those karmic contracts. And like I said, it really has to do with family as well and past relationships. So you can expect that in terms of love and relationships in May. So for daily updates in May about the Venus retrograde and Venus square Neptune and how that's going to affect you, follow me on Instagram at AstroKit, and make sure you subscribe to my channel so you don't miss my next video. And I'll see you Pisces in my next one. Hey Aquarius, so let's get into your prediction for the month of May, and let's talk about your love life and your financial life. And so of course the events that are impacting your love life and your financial life is the fact that Venus is going retrograde on May 13th, and then Venus squares Neptune on May 3rd and May 20th. Let's start off with your money life, and then we're going to talk about your love life after. So when it comes to Venus, of course, it represents two major things: relationships and money as well. So this Venus going retrograde on May 13th really represents this sense of reflection and reassessment of our finances. And so where is Venus in your chart in May? We can look at your chart right here, Aquarius. I forgot to write your name. Let me write your name. Aquarius, you're right here. So Venus is actually going retrograde into your 5th house. So let's write that down. Venus is going to be right here. So Venus is sitting here. And so as Venus goes retrograde into your 5th house, the main thing and question you're going to be contemplating is, will spending money bring me happiness? That's really what you're thinking about, is this connection between money and happiness. And 5th house is really this house of indulgence. It's the house of our inner child. And with Venus retrograding here, it's like you're really thinking about if the way you spend money makes you feel happy. Does it contribute to your inner child? Do you spend money on things that ultimately bring you some sort of enjoyment, bring you some sort of pleasure? How does the way you spend money bring you any sort of happiness? That's the real dynamic you're really contemplating in May, and especially with Venus going retrograde here. So of course, with retrograde energy, it's all about reflection. It's about reassessment. It's not really the time to spend money on things. It's not really the time to invest in new financial projects or even spend huge sums of money, right? That's not really advised with Venus retrograde, but more so it's about you reflecting on the things you spent money on in the past. And especially with Venus in the 5th house, it's like 5th house is all about pleasure. It's about the things we do for fun. So maybe you're thinking about like how much money you spent on things you did for fun, maybe like travel, how much money you spent on food. Oh my gosh, how much money you spent on indulgence. Anything that isn't, anything that isn't a basic necessity, you're really thinking about how much money you actually spent on that. And it's going to be kind of like a wake-up call of like, okay, maybe I spent too much money on my indulgence or activities that are pleasurable and not enough money on securing my future, for example. So of course, Neptune is going to square Venus as well, which is a whole nother ball game. And where is Neptune right now for you? It's in your 2nd house. So wow, okay. And so this is a huge transit for you just because Neptune is in your 2nd house of money. So money is really going to be challenged for you in May from the perspective of you feeling the urge, 5th house, to spend money on things that don't matter or spend money on things that are just kind of frivolous or just pleasurable. There's this sort of tension you'll feel between kind of wanting to secure your financial future with the 2nd house energy, but at the same time, you're kind of wanting to just spend all your money for no reason. And Neptune is, the truth about Neptune is that it's kind of a malefic planet. So even though it's kind of romanticized in astrology, Neptune is this planet of deception. It's the planet of illusions. It's this planet that causes loss in our life, right? It doesn't really bring anything good, even though people kind of romanticize it. But that's another video. So Neptune will kind of cause this sort of disillusion with your money, the sense of losing money, the sense of spending too much money, the sense of, oh my gosh, where did all my money even go? I spent too much of it. I can't keep track of it. Neptune is sort of like elusive. It's like quicksand. So it's going to really have that influence on your money. I won't lie to you guys. It's kind of a challenging month because with the 2nd house Neptune, it's like you want to get control of your money so badly, but just somehow it just keeps slipping from your hands. So that's kind of like what you're really experiencing in May, and there's this really huge challenge presented to you when it comes to spending money wisely, spending money on things that matter, and feeling like your money is just slipping away from you even though you keep trying to control it. So that's your kind of financial life in May. And so let's talk about this from the perspective of your love life. So again, we can look at the same planets because Venus does represent love as well. It represents relationships. So 5th house is the house of relationships too. 5th house does represent romance and flirting and more so lighthearted relationships, whereas the 7th house is like serious relationships. So when it comes to love and this Venus in retrograde, you're really asking yourself the question, does this relationship, Venus, nurture my soul, 5th house? And so I think I briefly touched on that earlier, where 5th house does represent our inner child. It represents our soul, right? Our soul's expression, what makes us happy. And so you're really reflecting on past relationships and thinking like, did this make me happy? Did this contribute to my happiness overall? Did it contribute to my soul's evolution? Did it contribute to anything pleasurable or enjoyable? And this is a really significant transit for you because you're really thinking about love from the perspective of your own, I guess, your own soul's fulfillment. Does this fulfill me on any level? And ultimately, obviously, with your soul and happiness, only you can fulfill yourself. Only you can make yourself happy. And people just kind of join in on that. So when it comes to relationships, you're thinking like, okay, did this person support that fulfillment of myself? Did that person support me in loving myself? And maybe they didn't. So you're going to really be thinking about that since it is retrograde and reflecting on past partnerships. And so for you, I will say it's not really a good time to start past partnerships or reignite past partnerships. Don't start new ones because it is retrograde. It's not good to start new things during a retrograde. So the other main chunk of this is obviously Neptune squaring Venus. So that's really huge for you just because, again, 5th house is already the house of romance. So romance is going to be heavy on your mind in May and heavy on your consciousness and just thinking about love and partnerships. And you might feel the urge to want to kind of enmesh yourself in partnerships or join new partnerships, but you really have to find a sense of clarity. And Neptune is this planet that represents a lack of clarity. So when it comes to partnerships, expect to almost be deceived by some people. Expect to maybe be lied to by some people. If you're not lied to or deceived in May, obviously, it's a time where you're reflecting on maybe moments where you were deceived, where you were lied to. Neptune does represent lies and deception. It represents illusions. So beware of people trying to sell you illusions, trying to sell you dreams, trying to sweet talk you into doing things or sweet talk you into being some sort of partner with them. That's not love at all. So this transit you're having with Neptune squaring Venus, it really forces you to be sort of more discerning about people and what their intentions truly are. Like I said, Neptune is deception, it's lying, right? Neptune influence on our chart, Neptune influence through a transit, it represents people lying to us. It represents people deceiving us. So you really have to be aware of that and beware of your romantic partnerships and really reflect on whether or not it's conducive to your soul's expression, your soul's journey, your soul's happiness, which is the 5th house. For daily updates on this Venus in retrograde and Venus square Neptune, you guys can head to my Instagram at AstroKit, where I will post updates about this month of May and this whole messiness that is going on. So head to my Instagram at AstroKit, subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss my next video, and I'll see you Aquarius there. Capricorn, so let's talk about your month of May and let's talk about your financial life and love life during the month of May and how the major events happening will influence you. So the major events that are happening are, of course, Venus going retrograde, which happens on May 13th. And then Venus actually squares Neptune on May 3rd and then again on May 20th. So let's start off with your financial life and your money in May, and then we'll get to love and relationships after that. So when it comes to money, now obviously Venus is a planet that represents relationships, of course, which we'll talk about, but it also represents money. It's a really key planet when it comes to money and finances. So Venus is going retrograde into your 6th house. So let's write that down. And so with Venus going retrograde here, you're really contemplating this question of how can I organize my money better? How can I spend my money more efficiently? 6th house energy is all about routines. It's about habits. It's about doing things efficiently and productively. And like we talked about in your May predictions video that I posted previously on my channel, we talked about you being efficient. We talked about you being productive and how that's really your driving force in the month of May. And especially when it comes to money, you really want to apply that same energy. So with Venus retrograde, what is retrograde all about? It's about reflecting. It's about reassessing things. It's not really the time to spend a bunch of money. It's not the time to start new financial projects. In fact, it's probably good not to do those things at all, just because you're not really seeing clearly when it comes to money in May. So when it comes to that topic of reflection, you're really reflecting on how you spend your money every single day. What are your spending habits, right? 6th house is the house of habits. It's the house of daily routine. And then Venus represents money. So it's like you're really thinking about like, wait, I spend this much money on this much stuff every single day, or I have this thing that I buy every day. Or maybe you think about whatever your habit is pertaining to money, you're just thinking about that. You're analyzing it. You're really thinking about how you can be more productive when it comes to spending money, how you can be more efficient, right? This sixth house energy really wants to be efficient. It wants to be organized. It wants to do things in a way that is productive ultimately. So in May, you have this urge to be more productive with your money, and it's going to be a challenge to really refine your spending habits just because Venus is squaring Neptune. So Neptune right now, it's sitting in your third house. And so Neptune has been sitting in your third house for I think the past year. Neptune doesn't move fast. It stays in one house for a few years, I think. So that's not moving. So what's going to happen is Neptune is going to square Venus over here in your sixth house. So what does third house represent? It also represents our habits, but more so from the perspective on our immediate surroundings. I feel like sixth house represents habits in a more so objective way, or kind of a way that is more kind of metaphorical sometimes. But third house is very literal. It's a very tangible house where it's your literal everyday surrounding. And so you're really also asking yourself, are my spending habits wasteful? And Neptune, I will say Neptune isn't really, it's not a benefic planet in astrology. I know in astrology people kind of romanticize it, but it doesn't really bring good things in our chart. It represents the sense of loss, the sense of lack of clarity. It represents lies and deception. So really be careful because people might be lying to you. Third house is the house of communication. It's the house of siblings, right? It's the house of neighbors and coworkers. So be careful. You might realize somebody's lying to you at work, or might be lying to you, maybe even a sibling or a cousin. Third house are those people, right? So be careful of people lying to you, Neptune, and especially people like peers and cousins and brothers and people that just surround you in your immediate life. Okay, so let's talk about this Venus retrograde from the perspective of love, and let's really talk about your love life and your relationships and how it will be affected by this transit. And the main question you're contemplating with Venus retrograde in the sixth house is this relationship productive? Like we talked about in your May predictions video and a little bit in this video, is that the driving force in May for you is this sense of productivity, this sense of efficiency, doing things in a way that is conducive to your health. And when it comes to relationships, you're really contemplating is this relationship conducive to my health? Is it conducive to my mental health, to my physical health? Sometimes, honestly, relationships can be so draining. And with a sixth house Venus transit, you really might experience this realization that wow, this relationship I have is so draining emotionally. It's so draining physically. And I feel like sometimes relationships that are emotionally draining, it kind of manifests as physical exhaustion sometimes. So sometimes your body even tells you when people aren't right for you just because it feels exhausting to be around them. And so you might be really thinking about this sense of being emotionally drained by people. And with retrograde, it's about reflection, right? So maybe you're reflecting on people who are draining you. Maybe you're realizing someone you have a relationship with currently is draining to you. That's what I feel like sixth house transits are good for. It's kind of bringing that to your consciousness about people who are draining to you overall. And especially with that third house squaring Neptune, I don't like this at all. I don't like this because I feel like it's people that drain you on a daily basis. This can represent people that drain you at work, people that drain you that are your siblings, people that drain you that are your peers, third house people, right? And so really beware of those people that just surround you and if they drain you or not. I think that's the main thing you're really contemplating. And so when it comes to relationships and love, I would say really be careful of people deceiving you. Sometimes I feel like for Capricorns, it might be somebody that you might not even think about, right? Somebody that is kind of in your immediate surroundings. And I feel like Venus in retrograde is going to help you to reflect on those people and whether or not they are conducive to your productivity. Are they conducive to your health, your mental health, your healing journey? And if they're not, then of course you just have to cut them out of your life. And so for daily updates about this Venus in retrograde and Venus square Neptune, you guys can head to my Instagram at AstroKit and subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss my next video, and I'll see you Capricorns there. Hey Sagittarius, so let's get into your prediction, and we're going to talk about your love life and your financial life in the month of May. Now obviously the major event that's impacting those aspects of your life in May is that Venus is going retrograde and then Venus is going to square Neptune. So of course, as you guys know, Venus is a planet that represents love, but it also represents money, and it plays a huge role in our financial life and how we spend money and how we earn money overall. So here's your chart, Sagittarius, and Venus is going retrograde in your 7th house. So this is a really significant transit for you because, of course, 7th house is the house of partnerships, and Venus is the planet of partnerships. So we're really going to unpack the relationship aspect of this after the money aspect. So first, when it comes to money and this Venus in retrograde in your 7th house, now Venus, of course, represents money, but when Venus goes retrograde, it represents reflection on how you spend money. It represents reassessing your finances. So from the perspective of the 7th house, you're really reflecting on whether or not the way you spend money is logical. I feel like 7th house represents this sense of logic and balance because it's associated with Libra, right? 7th house represents Libra in the chart. So I feel like you're really thinking about like, is the way I spend money logical? Is it balanced? How can I spend money in a more balanced way? And I feel like this is so pivotal for Sagittarius specifically because you guys are ruled by Jupiter. Jupiter is the planet of excess. It's the planet of overindulgence. It's this planet of like obesity and spending too much money and just doing things almost extremely, right? So Venus really wants to refine things. So this Venus retrograde is really going to affect you in a very impactful way because it's going to help you to refine your resources, refine the way you spend money, and really reflect on maybe how you spent money in the past and whether or not it was excessive. Was it too much? Was it overindulgent? And you're really reflecting on spending money in a more balanced way. And 7th house is also the house that represents other people. So I feel like something you're also contemplating is the balance between spending money on yourself, which is 1st house, which is opposite the 7th house, and spending money on other people. Again, maybe you spend money on yourself too much, but then with Sagittarius, I feel like you're somebody who is very generous as well. So maybe you spent too much money on other people and you have to refine that a bit. It's okay to be generous and give to people, but sometimes there's a boundary you need to draw, right? 7th house and 1st house axis is really about boundaries. So you're really setting this boundary with your finances, setting this boundary of how you spend your money and kind of refining it and trying not to spend money in excess. Especially with Venus retrograde, it's a good time to save your money. It's not really a time to spend and splurge and just be excessive because it kind of backfires because retrograde energy is kind of known for that. And so a curveball you will be thrown in May is that Neptune is going to square Venus. So this makes things so messy. I'll write this down for you. Neptune is going to be in your 4th house. And so Neptune has been in your 4th house. It's going to be there for a while. Neptune stays in one house for like years. Now, Neptune is this planet that represents illusion. It represents deception. It represents a lack of clarity. So when it comes to financial security and balance, I can sense in May there might be a challenge where it's like you need to balance something and you need to create security financially, but you can't see things clearly. And that's really what Neptune does. It kind of creates this delusional mess. And I feel like Neptune is really like romanticized in astrology, but Neptune doesn't really bring good things in our chart. It's kind of malefic overall. So you can expect to maybe struggle with creating that financial security and struggle with making balance overall, because Neptune doesn't really want order. It doesn't want any logic or common sense. And 7th house does represent logic. It does represent balance and common sense. So expect that challenge of Neptune kind of challenging you financially and making you want to spend money in a way that isn't logical. Okay, so now let's talk about love and partnerships. So of course, Venus represents those things as well. And of course, Venus is still sitting in your 7th house. Neptune is still sitting here. Now we're just going to talk about it from the love perspective. So when it comes to love, okay, this is a huge one to unpack just because, like I said, Venus is the planet of love. 7th house is the planet of partnerships. So when it comes to this Venus retrograde in your 7th house, you're really contemplating whether or not the relationships you engage in are balanced. Again, the key word here is balance. The key word is refinement as well. So you're really contemplating whether or not your relationships are balanced, whether or not you've had relationships that were balanced in the past. Again, I feel like with Sagittarius, your karmic lesson really involves this sense of excess, right? Jupiter wants to expand, it wants to spend money. It really wants to give itself in this almost infinite way. So when this transit happens in your chart, it's like you're really forced to look at and reassess the key concept of balance, which is something you might struggle with as a Sagittarius who's ruled by Jupiter, the planet of excess and expansion without limits. And so with this Venus retrograde also in the 7th house, it's like you're really reflecting on this sense of give and take in relationships, and you're thinking about your partnerships and whether or not you gave too much. Again, we just talked about that with your money, where it's like maybe you give too much, maybe you're too generous, and really thinking about what the other person gives to you. And with the retrograde, it's really about reflecting on past things, past events. So you might really be thinking about past relationships. And for you specifically, I feel like past lovers might come out of the woodwork just because 7th house is partnership. So be wary of past people trying to resurface into your life. I feel like when past people resurface into your life, it's not really good to like entertain them or like engage with them, but really kind of banish them to where they came from, or kind of just recognize the lesson in the partnership. Don't like try to reignite some partnership that was lost. And I also feel like there's this heightened awareness on whether or not your partnerships are karmic. And I feel like it's almost like you're going to start recognizing a pattern and recognizing whether or not your partners are repetitive. I feel like a lot of like Sagittarius in May are going to have this light bulb moment where it's like, wow, I've dated the same person over and over again. It's time to change it up a bit. It's time to turn this whole toxic pattern on its head and change things up. And I feel like you're really realizing the repetitiveness and the common patterns in all of your partners. And then, of course, as Neptune squares your Venus, expect to kind of almost be deceived by people, be lied to by people, and really reflecting on times you were lied to or deceived by others. Like I said, Neptune is deception. It is lying. So that's the curveball it's throwing you in May. It's like, okay, this person might lie to you. This person might deceive you. This person is trying to sell you this illusion of someone that they really aren't. So really be wary of that and beware of lies and deception on the behalf of other people. And I feel like in general, you're really reflecting on times you were deceived or lied to. So for daily updates and messages throughout May, especially about the Venus in retrograde and Venus square Neptune, and especially the dates for those events, that will be posted on my Instagram at AstroKit, so you guys can go check that out if you guys want to stay up to date with those events. And then also subscribe to my channel so you don't miss my next video, and I'll see you Sagittarius there. Hey Scorpio, so let's talk about the month of May for you and how your love life and financial life will be impacted. Now, as I mentioned in the beginning timestamp of this video, Venus is going retrograde on May 13th, and that's a huge event, and it's really going to affect our love life and our finances as a collective. And right now we're really going to talk about what that means for Scorpio. So in May, Venus will be retrograde in your 8th house. So I have your birth chart again, Scorpio. And so Venus is retrograde up here, and then Neptune will be squaring your Venus on May 20th and May 3rd. And your Neptune right now is in your 5th house. But we'll talk about that in a second. We'll talk about that Venus square Neptune in a second. But right now, let's just talk about Venus retrograde. So 8th house is the natural house of Scorpio. So this is kind of like familiar energy to you. But the key thing with Venus retrograde in your 8th house is that what you're really going to be contemplating is, do you have control over your finances? You're somebody who naturally wants to have control over things. And so when Venus goes retrograde is the time of reflection. It's the time of assessment, right? Reassessing things, reflecting on things, reanalyzing things. It's not really a time to like spend a bunch of money. It's not a time to start new financial projects. It's not a time to initiate anything new. It's the time of reflection, right? So you might be reflecting about how you share your money with people, how people share their money with you. And 8th house literally represents like taxes, inheritance, maybe insurance checks, things like that have to do with other people handling your money. So this could be a time where you're kind of reviewing your finances from, I guess, maybe like reviewing your insurance policy or reviewing your taxes, reviewing maybe you have like an accountant or something that reviews your money for you. Either way, you're really focused on reviewing your money from the perspective of others and reviewing the money that you do share with other people. Maybe you have your money invested in something with someone else. In May, you're really kind of contemplating, like, is this smart to do? Is it smart to have my resources invested in this thing with this person and all that kind of stuff? I feel like this is like kind of Scorpio's, I guess, stomping ground. Like, this is very familiar energy to you, where it's like you're used to probably sharing money with people, or I guess living off people, anything like that where you do share money or get money from people. It's like very Scorpio like, right? But when Venus goes retrograde, you're kind of more so reflecting on whether or not that's productive in your life. And something else you might be thinking about is who has access to your money. That's a key thing too, right? With 8th house Venus retrograde transit, it's like, okay, yeah, you have an accountant. Yeah, this person knows your password. Is it smart to have those people handling your money? I feel like you're really reflecting on who handles your money, if it's not only you, and reflecting on how to manage your finances better from your own perspective rather than have other people do it for you. So let's talk a little bit about that Venus square Neptune. So like I said, Venus is up here in the 8th house and then Neptune's down here in the 5th house. So you're having that square during May, on May 20th and May 3rd. And Neptune has been in your 5th house. So it's been in your 5th house for like I feel like a year or so. But Neptune stays in one house for a few years, so that doesn't go anywhere. It's just squaring Venus, which just now moved into your 8th house in May. And so Neptune is a malefic planet. It represents losses. It represents deception. It represents lies and illusions. So expect to maybe have some sort of financial loss in May. I know that's something you don't want to hear, but I feel like it's good to tell you guys now, because Neptune, it causes, like, the results it causes oftentimes brings our life into kind of more of a messier position than it may have been before. And then 8th house is the house of sudden gains and sudden losses, and the house of extremes as well. So in May, there might be some sort of extreme loss due to this Neptune square. So you guys do have to be wary of that. Be really wary of who controls your money. If anyone has access to your money on any level, you have to kind of block that or change that somehow, because this whole scenario indicates somebody deceiving you or lying to you about your money. So maybe if you have some sort of accountant, insurance broker, it might be somebody like that might deceive you, take your money. They might cause some sort of loss with your money. And then also, if you're like someone who's younger that's watching this, because I'm sure the younger people watching this don't have like an accountant and an insurance broker, but maybe somebody that's like, I guess you thought was a friend might deceive you when it comes to money. Maybe a romantic partner, anybody that I guess I'm trying to think who would deceive you if you don't have like somebody managing your money for you. You could have someone deceive you that is younger than you too, just because 5th house is the house of children. So just be wary of people trying to deceive you when it comes to money. And there might be a financial loss you do experience because of someone else, if that makes sense. It's not because of you, it's because someone else maybe had access to your account, maybe they took money from you. Either way, Neptune rules losses, Venus is money, so you have to be wary of that dynamic in May. Okay, so let's talk about your love life. So of course, Venus also represents relationships and love, and then Neptune, again, it still represents losses and deception. We're just looking at it from this love perspective now. So with Venus retrograde in the 8th house when it comes to love, this is a very karmic transit. And the main question you're contemplating is this relationship karmic? Is this relationship toxic? And you're also reflecting on whether or not your relationships cause personal suffering. 8th house is the house of suffering as well. So it's kind of a challenging month for Scorpios, I won't lie, just because 8th house energy is so extreme. It is so karmic too. So you're really reflecting on those past partnerships in terms of love and whether or not they were karmic or toxic. And then also you're thinking about, like, do you profit off of partnerships? And this can be financially, this can be just like emotionally or psychologically, where it's like, okay, is this person someone I can rely on? Is this someone I can grow with? Or is it just stagnant? Is it just toxic? Is it just a repetition of everyone I've dated that didn't work out? You're really thinking about that dynamic in May. And it's kind of a huge turning point for you in terms of partnerships and love, just because 8th house is the house of transformation, right? This is the Scorpio house. So again, it's kind of familiar energy to you. I feel like you guys definitely usually have like some sort of like drama or like something pertaining to relationships that is kind of toxic. And so in May specifically, you're really at this point where you're motivated to transform partnerships, but you can't really transform something until you kind of recognize the past first and past patterns. So that's what Venus in retrograde is for, is to recognize past patterns with partnerships and getting to the core of your relationships and exactly determining like why they're toxic for you. And so with this Venus square Neptune on May 20th and May 3rd, again, Neptune is lies, it's deception, it's people that are your enemies, right? So this can represent somebody you thought you loved, somebody you thought was like on your side is actually your enemy. So this is like hidden enemies coming to kind of get you, or maybe hidden enemies deceiving you or lying to you. So you really have to be careful of like people trying to lie to you, deceive you, and you're really going to see that theme really magnified in May. And of course, and 5th house is the house of romance and love. So I definitely feel like there might be someone you were like romantically involved with that was sort of a hidden enemy, somebody that wanted to deceive you or lie to you. Either way, they might pop back up in May, but you kind of have to have that hard block on them and not let them back into your life because they are toxic. So in May, when it comes to love, I will say that there's this huge theme of karmic, I guess, toxic partnerships, and really realizing what partnerships you've had that were toxic or karmic, and being careful not to believe people that have lied to you in the past, and really being discerning on whether people are honest and genuine and whether or not they're like a hidden enemy or somebody that wants to deceive you. I will say this is kind of messy energy. This looks like a whole like love and hip hop plot with this energy of the planets in May for you. So you really have to be kind of careful with that, about the drama. And so for daily updates about the month of May and things that are happening, go to my Instagram at AstroKit and subscribe to my channel for my next video because you guys don't want to miss it. And I'll see you Scorpios there. Hey Libra, so let's get into the month of May for you. And we're going to talk about your love life and your financial life and how the Venus retrograde and Venus square Neptune will impact you. So this is really important for you, Libra, just because you're ruled by Venus. So this is a time where it's like you really feel this retrograde quite heavily. And Venus goes retrograde on May 13th and it squares Neptune on May 20th. So you're really going to feel that during that period of time. And so let's talk about where Venus is in your chart right now. So Venus goes retrograde into your 9th house. And we talked about that 9th house energy in your May predictions video I just posted on my channel. So with this Venus retrograde, it really represents reflecting. It represents reassessing, especially as it pertains to partnerships and money. And we're going to talk about how this affects your financial life first, and then talk about love after. So when it comes to money and Venus being retrograde in the 9th house, you're really asking yourself, do you spend money excessively? The 9th house is the house of expansion. It's the house of excess. 9th house, you can think about it as sort of like this house that doesn't have limits on it. It's all about this sense of being limitless. It's ruled, or it's associated with Sagittarius. Sagittarius is the sign of excess, right? So Venus being here, it's kind of like you're contemplating whether or not you spend too much money, whether or not you spend money in a balanced way, which is a very Libra thing to think about, is balance. And you're also really reflecting on your beliefs about money, what you believe to be true. Obviously, you guys probably know that we all have certain programmed beliefs about money, and sometimes that impacts us in a negative way. So for example, if you grew up in a household where the belief was that money is scarce, there's not enough of it, then you kind of grow up as an adult with that same belief. But with this Venus in retrograde, you're kind of contemplating that. You're reassessing that, like, wait, do I believe money is abundant? Do I believe I can earn it infinitely? Do I believe I can earn it in excess? You're really trying to navigate and balance out and reflect on your beliefs about money and kind of like your philosophy of how you earn it in your life. And of course, 9th house is the house of travel, is the house of higher knowledge. So maybe you're focused on how you can invest more into those things, because those are things that do contribute to your well-being overall and ultimate happiness and are very fulfilling. So you might be thinking about like how you've spent money on educational courses or school, or maybe travel, anything that relates to that 9th house energy, right? You're thinking about how you spend money on those things, and maybe you're thinking about how you can spend money on those things in the future. But of course, your main question you're asking yourself is like, am I spending too much money on those things? Do I believe I can earn a lot of money? What is my beliefs about money that contribute to my success overall? And so this Venus squaring Neptune. Now, Neptune is a very malefic planet in astrology. I know it kind of I feel like Neptune gets really romanticized in astrology, but Neptune represents hidden enemies. It represents loss, deception, and illusions, right? It's not really a great planet in our charts. And so when it comes to money, Neptune might cause financial loss, of course. It might cause kind of this disillusionment when it comes to money. And honestly, the way I see it manifesting for Libra is that I feel like it's going to throw you a curveball in May with Neptune squaring Venus, where it's like you have some sort of delusion about money, and then it causes you to spend it erratically, or causes you to spend it in a way that isn't really smart, but you feel like it's smart. You feel like it's the right thing to do, because what does Neptune do? It causes illusions. So it might create this sort of illusion around money or something you want to spend money on. For example, if you want to spend money on something that looks bright and shiny, like maybe like a new car, or even something smaller than that, it looks good, right? That's what Neptune is. It's an illusion, but you might find out that car is like a lemon, or you find out whatever you're trying to buy doesn't work as well as you thought it would. It's not practical. So you really have to be careful of be careful about spending money on things that aren't practical. Venus in retrograde indicates like not really spending money at all. It kind of indicates saving money. And so in May, it's probably smarter and more wise of you to not spend your money as quickly, but really reflect before you spend money and invest in things, because Neptune will create an illusion around something and then cause you to kind of deceive yourself, and then you spend money that you didn't really need or have to spend. Of course, in May, I feel like the biggest lesson you might learn is being very analytical before you spend money. If something looks really good and very glamorous, that Neptune vibe, right? It's probably not the best to spend money on it. I feel like that's the biggest thing you might encounter in May, and really be careful of that. And so let's talk about your love life now. So when it comes to love, of course, Venus represents love as well. And so Venus and Neptune are sitting in the same place. We're just going to look at it from the love perspective now. And with Venus retrograde in the 9th house, it's so impactful because you're Libra, you're ruled by Venus, you're all about partnerships, right? And the main question you ask yourself with Venus sitting in your 9th house during retrograde is, does this relationship align with my beliefs? You're really reflecting on whether or not the relationships you have align with your greater purpose. I feel like we talked about that in your May predictions, where you're thinking about your greater purpose and you want to do things that align with that, right? And Venus in retrograde I feel like the purpose of it for you is to decide whether or not this partnership aligns with your greater purpose. Does it align with your goals in life? Does it align with your greater vision? I feel like it's about you thinking whether or not you can envision someone in your life. 9th house is the house of higher visions too. I feel like we talked about that in your last video, but yeah, it's like, can you see them in your life? If you can't envision them in your life, then goodbye. Like, it's really about just whether or not they align with your vision or not. Of course, the 9th house is all about truth, honesty, the greater truth, your inner truth. And you're really thinking about whether or not your relationships align with your inner truth. Do they reflect any sense of truth? Are they honest? Is this person honest? Is this person even aligned with the honesty I have within myself? Because I feel like there's the greater truth of the world, right? Of the universe, but we all have our own inner truth. And I feel like you're really contemplating whether or not the people you engage with or let into your life, do they align with that truth you have within yourself? I feel like the main questions you're asking is, can I be honest with this person? Can we be honest with each other? And does this relationship reflect my inner truth? There's this huge theme of truth for you and honesty, and whether or not the people you invite into your life align with that at all. So let's talk about this curveball you're going to be thrown in May. So like I said, Neptune is squaring Venus on May 3rd and May 20th. So you're going to feel that energy in May, definitely. And we already talked about Neptune. Neptune is the planet of lies and deception and illusion. So maybe expect people to I don't want to say expect people to lie to you, but it's a definite possibility that someone will try to deceive you. Somebody will try to create some sort of illusion towards you in love that isn't true. And ninth house, like I said, there's this huge theme of honesty, this huge theme of truth. And Neptune, no, Neptune's not about that. Neptune is about lying and deception. So I feel like you might be thrown a curveball or expect some sort of situation where someone's trying to lie to you, sell you some sort of dream. Neptune does represent glamour as well. So the way Neptune deceives us is that it creates this very pretty illusion, this pretty picture, right? And I feel like Libra is definitely attracted to aesthetics. So you might see the picture and you're like, oh, this is beautiful. You might see a situation or a person. You're like, this is beautiful. It looks great, right? And I feel like Libras can be very kind of susceptible to that sort of illusion, and it ends up not being that at all. It ends up being the opposite. It ends up being something that will harm you. And Neptune also represents hidden enemies too. So somebody can be a hidden enemy but give you the illusion of being a partner, give you the illusion of being someone that loves you, but they're truly not. So you might experience that in May, and you might realize somebody specifically has been deceiving you, but they look pretty, right? They look amazing, and they talk a big game, and there's somebody that has like this grand illusion of who they are, but that's exactly what they are, an illusion. So they might be a liar and be deceptive. And ultimately they are like a hidden enemy. So really beware of that. I have a feeling for some Libras, this can be someone that is already in your life that you might realize in May is not who you think they are. And then for some other Libras, it might be somebody new who approaches you with some sort of illusion, and it's kind of your job and responsibility to discern whether or not that's, true or not true. So you definitely have a lot going on in May where it's like people, I feel like deception is like this key word here when it comes to love, and you really have to stick to your truth. You really have to stick to your beliefs and not be deceived by people. I think that's a really key theme, and don't believe everything from face value. Don't believe illusions, and really try to ground yourself in the truth so you're able to better kind of defend yourself against those deceptive people who put on a really glamorous picture of themselves. So for daily updates during the month of May, you guys can head to my Instagram at AstroKid and subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss my next video. And I will see you Libras there. Virgo, so let's get into the month of May for you, and let's talk about your love life and your financial life during the month. Now, of course, as I mentioned in my previous video, in May, Venus is going retrograde. So that's a huge event that affects love and finances, and we're going to talk about how that impacts Virgo. So Venus is going retrograde on May 13th, and then it squares Neptune on May 3rd and May 20th. So I have your guys' chart here again. So of course with Venus represents two major things, right? It represents our love lives, and then it represents money too. So when it comes to money, you're going to have your Venus retrograde is going to be in your 10th house. And we already talked about that 10th house energy in your previous prediction video. And so how does Venus retrograde impact your financial life in the 10th house? This is the transit that really makes you contemplate how you can make money in your career. I feel like May for you is a very career-driven month, I guess, and you're really focused on your career. And with Venus being retrograde in your 10th house, you're really reflecting on how you can spend money on your career, how you can create a long-term budget. The 10th house is the house of achievements. It's this house of strategizing things for the long term. 10th house is naturally associated with Capricorn energy, and Capricorn energy does things for the future, and it plans things out over a long period of time. So 10th house energy isn't really short or impulsive. It's not like, okay, I want it now, so I get it now. It's a very long-term sort of house. So I feel like in May, you're really going to be reflecting on how to create that long-term budget for yourself, really logically organizing your finances, and really thinking about how can you make money in your career. Maybe you're thinking about different ways to make money. And I will say that with a retrograde, it's more about reflecting on money. It's more about reflecting on how you spend it, reassessing your budget, and I guess balancing your books. It's not really about spending new money. With retrogrades, you never really want to start anything new. You don't want to start some new financial project because it tends to backfire later on. So make sure you're not like spending new money or spending a bunch of money, but really reflecting on, I guess your long-term goals in terms of money, reflecting on your budget, reflecting on whatever, I guess, achievements you want to have in your life and how to get there, but not really starting or initiating it just quite yet. So that brings me to another point where it's like you're thinking about new ways of managing money. Maybe you're thinking about a new bank. I feel like 10th house rules banks as well. You're thinking about getting a new bank account, maybe joining with a different banking system. Again, maybe it's not good to join with that system just yet, but really think about it, reassess it. And maybe in May, you're making some sort of like financial spreadsheet where you make a list of your financial goals. Maybe if you're trying to find a new bank or a new way of managing money, maybe you're writing out your requirements. Maybe you're writing down things that are like deal breakers when it comes to banks and stuff. Like I said, it's really good to reflect and write down your goals, but not really act on them quite yet. Don't join a new bank too impulsively or join some sort of financial institution where it's not really good to do that during a retrograde, especially Venus being retrograde. And also, I will say with Venus retrograde in the 10th house, you're asking yourself, how can you invest money better? So overall, there's this huge theme of like seeing the long-term plan of things, seeing the long-term goals and how to invest into that, create a strategy for that, and not just doing things quickly or doing things that only last for a temporary amount of time. So ultimately, that Venus retrograde in the 10th house is about you asking yourself, how can you make money in your career? How can you invest money better? How can you create a long-term budget? And so that brings me to Venus squaring Neptune. So Neptune right now is in your 7th house, and Neptune stays in one house for a few years. So Neptune doesn't really move, but Venus is moving in May, of course, because it's a quick moving planet. So Venus square Neptune is kind of a challenge just because Neptune is a very malefic planet in astrology. Neptune is the planet of deception. It's the planet of illusions. It's the planet of hidden enemies. So during May, you might run into some sort of conflict where maybe there's some sort of financial loss. And you might even realize in May, somebody has been deceiving you. Mind you, the two houses activated in this square going on is 10th house, career, and 7th house, partnerships. So maybe somebody in your career life or coworker or even some sort of like accountant or business partner has been deceptive towards you. And that you're going to find out in May if someone has been deceiving you in terms of money and whether or not they are true and honest. So that is kind of challenging energy to work with Neptune squaring Venus. And I feel like for Virgo, it I don't know, this might manifest so many different ways, but it might manifest as some sort of like, I feel like business partnership, because 7th house is business partnership and contracts. So maybe you signed a contract that wasn't really beneficial to you, or maybe you partnered with someone in business and they were kind of shady, but you don't really realize it yet. And then once Venus squares Neptune, it's kind of like that person is revealed, or that person, I don't know, you kind of realize who this person is that's been deceiving you. And it might be a coworker, a business partner, somebody you signed a contract with might be deceptive towards you. I will say this also means that somebody might try to do that in May. So be careful of somebody that has already done that, and then be careful of people trying to do that in May. I would say for Virgo specifically, don't sign contracts. Just because 7th house is the house of contracts, so don't sign contracts in May because it might result in financial loss. Venus is finances and then Neptune is loss. So really be careful of financial loss in May due to other people, which is seen with the 7th house. Okay, so that's your financial life, but let's talk about your love life. Now with your love life, of course, Venus still represents love and relationships, and then Neptune still represents what I mentioned, so loss, deception, hidden enemies. So we're going to talk about Venus in retrograde in this 10th house and what it means for relationships for you. So the main question you're asking yourself with Venus being retrograde in your 10th house as it pertains to love is, what is the longevity of this partnership? Again, with 10th house, it's this very, I guess, it's this house focused on longevity. It's focused on the bigger goals, the long-term solutions, the long-term outcome, right? And so that's what you're really contemplating in terms of love in May. You're thinking about the longevity of the partnerships you have. Are they stable? Are they reliable? Again, 10th house is associated with Capricorn, right? And so Capricorn is that sign of stability, reliability. And so you're kind of reassessing whether or not your partnerships are reliable. Are they stable? And you're also reassessing whether or not partnerships are logical. Also, this 10th house Venus transit makes you think about marriage a little bit, but not really marriage from this super like romantic fantasy perspective, but marriage of like whether partnership makes sense. 7th house is the house of contracts. It's also the house of marriage. So when it comes to marriage, it is something you have to be logical about. So maybe you're reassessing whether or not your standards for people kind of are conducive to a successful marriage, if that makes sense. But you're not really, I guess, in the vibration of trying to get married in the moment. Maybe you're writing down your requirements or your standards when it comes to choosing a marriage partner and reflecting on whether or not that works into your long-term plan, 10th house, right? And so again, this Venus is squaring Neptune. So I feel like when it comes to partnerships, I feel like somebody might deceive you, especially with this 7th house Neptune. It represents deception and lying and people creating illusions, right? So in May, you might experience someone trying to cast an illusion, or maybe even the person themselves is kind of creating this illusion of who they are, but they're not really who you think they are. They might be a bit deceptive. And it also represents hidden enemies too. So you have to be careful of people maybe coming out of the woodwork and maybe you realize they are kind of your enemy, but in disguise. I feel like Neptune represents disguises as well. And it's really hard because it's in your 7th house. So it might be someone you thought was your partner, you thought was a friend, you thought was a business partner, but really they're not who you think they are, and you really have to watch out for the deception people try to portray to you in terms of your career, your love life, and partnerships. So for daily updates about the month of May and how it will impact you, head to my Instagram at AstroKit and then subscribe to my channel so you don't miss my next video, and I'll see you Virgos in my next video. Hey Leo, so let's talk about your financial life and your love life in the month of May. Now, as you guys know, in the month of May, Venus is going retrograde, and Venus rules love and money, and we're going to talk about how that influences you, Leo, sun, moon, and rising. And Venus specifically goes retrograde on May 13th, and then it squares Neptune on May 3rd and May 20th. So we're having a lot of I would describe it as sort of like messiness as it pertains to love and money, just because Neptune is influencing Venus in our charts. So we're going to talk about how that's relevant for Leo. So let's get started. Now we're going to talk about your money life first, and then we'll talk about your love life after. So let's start with money. So when it comes to money, obviously we're looking at Venus, and so I drew your chart here, Leo. And so Venus is going retrograde, like I said, May 13th. It's going retrograde in your 11th house. And we talked about that 11th house energy in your May prediction video I just posted for you guys. And so with this Venus going retrograde in your 11th house, and as it pertains to money, you're really asking yourself, do you spend money in a way that supports your goals? I feel like the 11th house is a super like underrated house just because it really represents your goals, but not just goals on a superficial level or shallow level, but goals of like your bigger vision, your bigger dreams, your bigger hopes in life, the bigger, I guess, picture you envision for yourself. I feel like that's the 11th house ultimately. Combining that sort of theme with this Venus in retrograde and money, I feel like you're really thinking about like, do you spend money in a way that contributes to this bigger vision that you have? Do you spend money in a way that is smart but still, I guess, beneficial to you? And also 11th house represents gains as well. And so when it comes to gaining things, we can see how we gain things, how we gain, especially from our career in a financial sense. And you're really kind of reassessing what you put in, like the work you put in and what you gain from that. I feel like Leo is really kind of balancing whether or not, like, if you work too hard for something and do you gain sufficient income from that, especially when it comes to career. Sometimes obviously it's easy to put a lot of work into things, but then are you getting paid what you feel like you deserve to be paid? And then also 11th house is the house of innovation. It's the house of doing things differently. So you might be contemplating like, how am I spending money in an innovative way? Am I spending money in an intelligent way? And sometimes you don't have to spend money in a super traditional way. You don't have to. But ultimately, I feel like you're questioning, is it smart? I feel like things can be innovative, but maybe it's not too smart to do. But I feel like you're really thinking about how you can earn money in innovative ways that kind of go beyond the traditional sense of making money. And so when it comes to Venus retrograde, it's not good to like spend money. It's not good to start new financial projects. It's more about reassessing what you you gain, right? With the 11th house, it's about reassessing how you earn money. It's really about reassessing how you make money and how that contributes to your hopes, dreams, goals, and wishes with this 11th house energy. So of course, 11th house is also, I will say, about social networks. So you can be assessing how to make money online, especially. 11th house does rule social networks and internet in a general sense. So maybe you're thinking about, okay, maybe I can earn money online in this super creative, super innovative way. Like I said in your May prediction video, you're really thinking outside of the box in May, and Venus in retrograde in your 11th house is kind of forcing you to think, okay, how can I make money, especially online, in a way that isn't traditional? And I feel like after the retrograde's over, you're going to have a really good strategy of making money in an innovative way. So you're going to be thrown a curveball when it comes to money because Neptune is squaring Venus. Now, Neptune is squaring Venus on May 3rd and also on May 20th. So 2 days out of the month, and you're going to feel that influence for more than just 2 days. But with Neptune, it's a malefic planet. I feel like Neptune is so romanticized in astrology. People think Neptune is like this spiritual, I guess, planet, but it's like, it is spiritual, but it is very malefic at the same time, and it does represent hidden enemies. It does represent lying and deception and illusions. So the curveball you might be thrown with that is some sort of financial loss, or maybe even a financial illusion you thought was profitable. And 11th house represents the outcome of things. It represents what you gain, right? So when Neptune squares Venus, it's kind of like maybe you thought you were gaining something, but it was really an illusion. I feel like for some Leos in May, this might manifest as, it seems like I get like Ponzi scheme energy from this, just because you guys know how on like Facebook and like Twitter, people do those like triangle Ponzi schemes or whatever. And 11th house does rule internet. So really be careful of people trying to scam you on the internet. I feel like that's this Neptune squaring Venus, especially on the 20th and the 3rd of the month. So watch out for those days and really watch out from like internet scams is what I feel like this is manifesting as. And so yeah, when it comes to money, I feel like you will be focused on what you gain and how to make money in an innovative way. But the challenge is that Neptune squares Venus, so you might be, someone might try to scam you or deceive you when it comes to money, especially through the internet, especially through social networks. This can be in real life as well, but I see it mostly manifesting online, obviously. And be careful of trying to invest your time and money into things, and it doesn't provide you a gain ultimately, because Neptune is illusions ultimately. So sometimes you might spend money on things you think is profitable, but it's really just an illusion. So you have to watch out for that. So let's talk about your love life. So this is what we really came for, right? So again, Venus is still sitting in the 11th, Neptune's in your 8th, and we're just going to look at it from this love perspective. So when it comes to love, so with Venus retrograde in the 11th house, you're really questioning, how does this relationship align with my goals? Like we talked about, the 11th house is all about your goals, your dreams, your wishes in this broader sense, right? Not just on a shallow level. So you're really contemplating the relationships you invite into your life and whether or not it aligns with your bigger vision. I feel like you're realizing your purpose in life is bigger than you. Your purpose in life is bigger than just being friends with someone or dating someone just because it feels good at the moment. I feel like you're having this super deep analysis of like, okay, this person doesn't align with this purpose I have or vision I have. And you're kind of maybe tossing them to the side if they don't align with that bigger vision, or if you don't gain from the relationship at all. We talked about how 11th house is gains, right? So if you don't gain from a relationship, Venus, then you're like, okay, I don't need it. So another aspect of this, of course, is friendship. 11th house does rule friendship. It rules groups. So you might be kind of reassessing your social groups or reassessing your kind of groups you're involved with, or maybe your friend group. This whole thing doesn't have to be just romantic because Venus does rule relationships in general. So maybe you're just assessing who you associate with. Who is your squad? Who is your like gang? Like who do you really align with, and do they align with your purpose? You're really kind of questioning that whole dynamic and questioning whether or not it's worth your time. And of course, from a romantic standpoint, you're really questioning whether or not the person that wants to date you or the person you're dating currently, is it rooted in friendship? Is your relationship based on a sense of camaraderie, or is it just based on a weird level of lust? Like you're really questioning, like, is this a friendship? Like, could we be friends despite this whole thing, despite romance? And I feel like you're really leaning towards the sense of friendship and uniting with other people based on common goals and reflecting whether or not the relationships you have in your life align with your greater purpose and vision. And so the curveball you're going to be thrown is that obviously, like I said, Neptune is squaring Venus. So like I said, Neptune is lies, deception, hidden enemies. So this can be a month where you find out maybe somebody you thought was a friend is a hidden enemy, especially with Neptune in the 8th house. 8th house it represents things that are hidden. It represents secrets. So you might find out some secrets online. Also be careful too. Also, I will say be careful with like online communities because like I said, 11th house is the internet, and if we're still on quarantine in May, obviously you're on the internet a lot, and Neptune is gossip. Neptune is lies and deceit. So maybe someone, like I said earlier, you might be like scammed online, but in the sense of relationships, maybe someone you thought was a friend, 11th house, is really a hidden enemy, which is Neptune. And so you have to be careful of being deceived, especially on the internet, or believing illusions through the internet. And then in real life, when it comes to the friend groups you're a part of, maybe somebody within that friend group is actually some sort of enemy, or they're lying to you or being deceitful towards you. So you really have to be wary of that Neptune energy, especially when it does square Venus, because it represents sort of deception when it comes to other people and people lying to you or deceiving you or creating illusions towards you. And I do sense for some Leos that maybe someone you thought was your friend or somebody you thought was your homie or part of your gang, they really aren't who you think they are. And so for daily updates about the month and these events that are going on and calendar dates you guys can look at and screenshot, follow me on Instagram at AstroKit, and then subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss my next video, and I will see you Leos there. Hey Cancer, so let's talk about the month of May for you and what's happening in your financial life and your love life. So in the month of May, as you guys probably know, Venus is going retrograde. So we're gonna really analyze how that influences Cancer, Sun, Moon, and Rising, and really analyze also the other transit that is happening, which is Venus square Neptune. So there's this real theme of like messiness and kind of disorganization when it comes to love and money, and we're going to see how that impacts your life. So when it comes to the dates of these events, Venus does go retrograde on May 13th, and then Venus squares Neptune on May 3rd as well as May 20th. So we're really going to feel that energy all throughout the month. And so let's get started on what that means for you, Cancer. So I do have your chart right here. So we're going to talk about your money life first, and then we'll talk about your love life after. So when it comes to money, we can look at Venus, of course, because Venus represents love as well as money. And Venus is going retrograde May 13th in your 12th house. So as you guys can see, Venus is right here, Neptune is right here. We'll talk about Neptune in a second. But when it comes to Venus retrograde in the 12th house, you're really asking yourself, how do you waste money on a regular basis? This is a really significant transit for you, Cancer, just because 12th house is the house of losses, and having Venus there can be challenging when it comes to money just because it represents losing money. It represents spending too much money on things, wasting money on things. Maybe you get your money stolen, something like that, where you do lose large amounts of money, or somehow just your money sort of escapes you. And when it comes to Venus being retrograde, you're really in this energy of reflecting on your money, reflecting on how you spend it, really thinking about, do you waste it or not? And I feel like for you, Cancer, you're really reassessing whether or not you spend money on things that are expenditures versus assets. I don't know if this is with every single Cancer, but a lot of Cancers, I feel like you're pretty good with money, or you care about money. I feel like money is definitely a huge theme in a lot of Cancers' life. I feel like a lot of like millionaires and billionaires are Cancers. I have to check that, but either way, I definitely feel like you have a certain relationship with money. And as I mentioned, you're really thinking about things that are expenditures versus assets. So in May, you might realize like, hey, maybe I waste money too much on this thing, and I shouldn't spend money on this because it's not constructive. I always say the 12th house is sort of like quicksand, because whatever goes in that house doesn't really come out. And it's hard with a Venus transit just because you want to have control over your money, Venus, but 12th house is not about that. 12th house is a very boundaryless sort of energy. So you have to be careful with that when it comes to money. And you might be really questioning, like, where does my money go? Especially in May, you might spend money on something and you're like, wait, that's not the price it should be. That's not how much it should cost. So you have to be careful about losing money in May. And also with Venus being retrograde, it's a time where it's not really good to spend new money. It's not good to buy, I guess, large purchases or initiate new financial projects, join a new bank, things like that, just because retrogrades are time for reflection and reassessing, and you're really reassessing your finances overall. It's not good to initiate new, I guess, financial expenditures. And so you're going to be thrown a curveball in May when Venus does square Neptune. So as we talked about, Venus squares Neptune on May 3rd and then again on May 20th. So when it comes to money, I don't know why, but I sense this, like, I don't know, something might happen when it comes to like you being scammed or somebody trying to get money from you. Again, 12th house is the house of losses, and Neptune is this planet that Neptune is really malefic, even though it's kind of romanticized in astrology. And so Neptune represents loss, it represents deception, it represents hidden enemies as well. It also represents the sense of delusion too. And 12th house is the house of losses. 12th house is associated with Neptune. So there's this potential for financial loss for you, especially with Venus in retrograde. You have to double check before you spend any type of money, especially for you, Cancer. There's this huge theme of loss when it comes to Neptune squaring Venus, and then Venus is already in your 12th house. So in May, there might be a moment where you lose some money, and it might be because you're confused, you're disillusioned by somebody. Again, Neptune is the planet of illusions. So maybe you buy something and it looks really pretty and there's this illusion on it, but then you realize it was a waste of money. It was a loss ultimately. So that's kind of what you're dealing with in terms of money. And so let's talk about your love life. So that's what we came for, right? So when it comes to relationships, you're really thinking about how your past relationships has contributed to your suffering. When it comes to 12th house is kind of a challenging house just because it does represent suffering in astrology. So when it comes to Venus being there during May, it's like you're really thinking about, like, did this person cause suffering in my life? Did this person contribute to my own self-sabotage? You're really reassessing past relationship trauma. 12th house is the house of our subconscious mind. So maybe you're remembering things from past relationships you thought you forgot. And the whole purpose of remembering things is to heal from past events. And with Venus retrograde in the 12th house, it's almost like this resurfacing of subconscious wounds. So you might really be reflecting on past relationships, whether or not they were toxic. If they were toxic, you're kind of contemplating whether or not, you, I guess, had some trauma from that. And then in May, you have this journey where you want to heal from that trauma. And you're just thinking about, like, how people have caused you pain. This can be a really just hard, very deep transit. But once you heal those sort of relationship wounds, those past wounds, right, then you're able to, I guess, move forward and be healthy and be a more evolved individual. And so the curveball you might be thrown is, obviously Venus is squaring Neptune, and we just talked about Neptune. Neptune is the planet of hidden enemies. It's the planet of loss and deception and illusions. So when it comes to love, somebody might try to deceive you, somebody might lie to you, or you're just realizing people have lied to you. People have been deceptive. People have been kind of these figures of illusions, right? I feel like you're really coming to terms with the sense of illusions and what is true, 9th house, and what is false. And also I will say that Cancer, this is such a hard transit for you just because, like, it's such a foggy energy. 12th house, like I said, it's the house of kind of this illusion, and Neptune is the planet of illusion. So you might be not seeing things very clearly in May, but you really have to put that mental strength to the test and really see things logically, even if it seems like a really pretty illusion or a really pretty scenario. It might not be that ultimately. So for more updates during the month of May, you guys can check out my Instagram at AstroKit and then subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss my next video. And I will see you Cancers in my next one. Hey Gemini, so let's talk about the month of May for you, and especially let's talk about your financial life and your love life. And so we're going to talk about how the month of May influences those aspects of your life. And of course, as you guys know, the major event that's happening in May is Venus going retrograde. And then the other major event is Venus squaring Neptune. So there's this like major messy energy when it comes to love and finances for us as a collective. And we're going to talk about what that means for you, Gemini. So when it comes to those events, I will say that the dates for those events are May 13th is when Venus goes retrograde, and then May 3rd is when it squares Neptune, and also again on May 20th it squares Neptune. So Venus square Neptune, Venus in retrograde is the main things that are influencing our lives in May. So let's talk about it. So we're going to talk about your financial life first, and then we're going to talk about your love life after. So I have your chart right here, Gemini. So Venus is going retrograde in your first house. So this is really significant because Venus is going retrograde in your sign, and Mercury is also sitting in your first house in May, like we talked about in your May predictions video. And so you're really feeling that first house energy, and not just from the perspective of the first house, but from the perspective of your own zodiac sign. So this energy really influences you quite heavily. And then Venus squares Neptune, and Neptune is sitting up here, but we'll talk about that in a second. So with Venus retrograde in your first house in May, when it comes to money, you're really asking yourself, how can my skill set make money? First house is all about ourself. It's all about our attitude towards ourselves, our attitude towards life, and it's also about our self-worth as well. And when it comes to Venus retrograde, it's a time where we're really reassessing our finances, reassessing how we spend money, and you're thinking about that, of course, but how you do that in relation to your own skills, your own identity, your own attitude. You're really reassessing especially your attitude towards money, like how do you feel towards money? And also, how much money do you make based on your own self-worth? I feel like the biggest thing here is like self-worth. And so we can really tie how much money we make a lot of the times to our own self-worth. If you don't have high self-esteem, then you don't feel like you're worth a lot of money. You don't feel like you can charge people for your services at the accurate amount. So you're really reflecting on whether or not you make enough money, and if it reflects your own self-esteem. If you have high self-esteem, then you don't mind charging people what you're worth. You don't mind really looking at your own value. And especially when it comes to jobs and stuff, you're thinking about like, wait, am I earning enough at this job? Can I rise higher in my position? You're really kind of thinking about that checks and balances aspect of the money you make versus the money you earn. And you're really questioning whether you make as much money as you feel you're worth. And so with Venus being retrograde, the key word here is reflection. It is reassessing. So it's not really a good time to spend new money or initiate new financial projects. You might have that urge to initiate new things just because the first house is kind of like this house of initiation. You want to start things, right? But it's not really good to start new financial projects because retrograde is about reflecting on things. And if you start new things with the retrograde, it kind of backfires later on. And so the curveball you're going to be thrown in May when it comes to money is Venus is squaring Neptune. That's a really hard transit just because Neptune is a very malefic planet in astrology. I feel like Neptune gets really romanticized by people in astrology, but it's not really a romantic sort of energy. It's the energy of lies. It's the energy of deception and hidden enemies. That's what Neptune does represent. And so you really have to be aware of that transit, especially on May 20th and May 3rd, like I said, because you really have to be aware of losing money and maybe even being scammed or spending money on things that don't really matter, just because Neptune is illusions. And with it squaring this first house Venus, it's like you aren't seeing things clearly. You aren't seeing things logically, and sometimes you might lose money because of some illusion you believed. So you really have to be wary of that when Venus does square Neptune. But other than that, you really just are reflecting on your finances in terms of your own self-worth, your own self-esteem, and sort of like your attitude towards money overall. And so now let's talk about your love life. So that's what we really came for, right? So when it comes to your love life, of course, we're still looking at these same planets. So your Venus is sitting here, and then Neptune's sitting here in May. And so you're really asking yourself with this transit, how have my past relationships affected my self-esteem? And even more deeply, you're really thinking about how have past relationships reflected who I truly am? And with the first house, the key words are self-esteem and identity. So you're really questioning that whole dynamic between your relationships and whether or not they reflect your identity. Are you pairing with people that reflect who you truly are? Are you pairing with people that boost your self-esteem, that support you? or are you pairing with people that tear down your self-esteem? Even if it's in subtle ways, sometimes we can pair with people that we think are in our best interest, right? Because Neptune is illusions and deception and hidden enemies, but you really find out they kind of take like little jabs at you, or they kind of try to tear you down a notch on a subtle level. And maybe you've experienced some sort of subtle manipulation in that sense. And during May, you're kind of realizing like, wait, this person was like really deceptive, and they were sort of like a hidden enemy. And ultimately, you're really reflecting on the kind of person you do want, and the kind of person that does support your self-esteem, and the kind of person that does reflect who you truly are and your identity. I will say with identity as well, I feel like you're going to reflect on whether or not a person is sort of like a match with you. Like, do they, like, if you're somebody who does a certain thing and participates in certain aspects of life, you want to partner with someone that kind of wants to do the same thing or has the same goals. Obviously, you don't want someone that's like exactly like you, but I feel like you're really contemplating whether or not a person is a match for you and your identity in terms of your own goals in life. And so with Venus retrograde in the first house, I feel like you're really thinking about that concept of cause and effect. We can really see that with this first house, seventh house dynamic. First house is here, and then seventh house is the opposite of that, obviously. So first house we can often see as like the cause, and then seventh house is the effect. And when it comes to relationship, this is like who you are, who you project yourself as, and then who you attract based on that projection. So you're really questioning that whole dynamic, like, okay, am I being authentic? Am I being true to myself? Am I projecting the identity I want to attract to myself? And you might realize like maybe I didn't project the, I guess, person I actually was. So then you attract people that aren't true to who you are. So it really starts with you. And I feel like you're realizing you have to be the cause of your own, I guess, romantic destiny. And I really feel like for Gemini, you're really working through your own self-esteem and maybe even self-esteem issues in May. And obviously when you work through those issues, you attract a person that is very suited to who you are, and somebody you will have a happy relationship with because you're happy with yourself. So let's talk about this curveball you're going to be thrown in May. So when it comes to love, like I said, things get a bit messy with this whole Neptune energy. Neptune is like I said, it represents lies, deception, and hidden enemies. So Neptune is going to square Venus. That's happening on the 20th, and it's happening on the 3rd. So you're going to feel it kind of 2 different points of the month. And so what that means for you, Gemini, with this Neptune square Venus is that, again, it's like the sense of someone lying to you, the sense of someone deceiving you, the sense of someone you thought was a friend, and they put up the illusion, Neptune, of being a friend or a partner or romantic interest, but really they're a hidden enemy. And I feel like we just talked about that with people who like subtly try to tear you down and subtly try to manipulate you, and people that don't really support your self-esteem but put on the illusion that they do. So I feel like you might experience that dynamic in May where somebody is sort of not really in your best interest, but they put on this show that they are. And maybe if you don't experience that directly with the Venus and square Neptune transit, you might have a reflection period where you realize, wait, this person was deceptive. So either way, you're kind of thinking about past people who were like that. And then in May, you might experience people who will try to do that. That's why I really wanted to make this video for you guys, to kind of warn you with the Venus square Neptune aspect and how it kind of brings those deceptive people that are kind of like liars and, I don't know, con artists into our lives. And you really have to be discerning about who that person really is, and you can only really see people for who they really are once you see yourself for who you really are. And I really feel like that's what Gemini is doing in May. So for daily updates, you guys can head to my Instagram at astrokit and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss my next video, and I'll see you Geminis there. Hey Taurus, so let's talk about your financial life and your love life in the month of May. So as you guys know, in May, Venus does go retrograde, and then it also squares Neptune. So there's a huge theme of kind of messiness when it comes to finances and love. And we're going to talk about how that impacts Taurus, specifically sun, moon, or rising. And so just to tell you guys the dates of these events, Venus does go retrograde in Gemini on May 13th, and then it squares Neptune on May 3rd and May 20th. So we're really going to get into what that means for you, Taurus. So let's start off with your financial life, and then we'll get into your love life after. So I have your chart here, Taurus, And so we're going to take a look at Venus and what that is doing in your chart in May. And then we're going to look at that Neptune square that's happening. So first, let's talk about this Venus retrograde. So this is a really huge transit for you just because it's retrograde in your second house, which is the house of money. And it is Taurus season. So you're really going to have this major focus on money overall in May. And especially when it comes to this Venus being retrograde, you're really asking yourself, how is my money making strategy effective? Ultimately, with Venus being retrograde, keyword retrograde, it's really about the sense of reassessment. It's about the sense of reflection. It's not really about spending money in large sums or large quantities, or even changing your banking system. It's not really a time to start new financial projects, right? Because it's really when you are reflecting on your past spending habits, you're reflecting on your past financial strategy. And especially with you being a Taurus, you're somebody who can be very passionate about money. Maybe you're somebody who's good at money. Either way, money is a huge karmic theme for Taurus in general, just based on your archetype. And so you're reflecting on how you spend money. Is the strategy you have in place for making money, is it effective? Is it profitable? I feel like you're really reflecting on whether or not what you do for money is profitable. Do you make enough money? Is it distributed evenly? Is it distributed in a way that makes you more money? Maybe you're thinking about how to invest your money, and not just money, you're thinking about resources that relate to money as well. So like assets, and things like that. And of course, at its core level, the second house is about this sense of value. Again, I feel like that's a key theme with Taurus, is the sense of value. And especially with Venus being retrograde, you're reflecting on whether or not you give enough value. Do you receive enough value? Can you give more value to receive more? I feel like you're really contemplating that sense of value and whether or not you receive it in your life, and how you can cultivate more value in your everyday life. So ultimately, this reflecting period is about you reflecting on your financial strategy, reflecting on this sense of value. If you receive value, do you make value? Do you create value within yourself, and do you profit off of that? And so let's talk about this curveball you're going to be thrown in May. So like I said, Venus is squaring Neptune, and that's happening on May 3rd and then again on May 20th. And so Neptune is a pretty malefic planet in astrology. I won't lie to you guys. Neptune, let's be honest, Neptune is kind of romanticized in astrology, but it's kind of like, it's not really a good planet. And that's because it represents lying, it represents deception, it represents illusions and hidden enemies. So when it comes to your financial life, Taurus, in May, you might be thrown this curveball of maybe financial loss. Neptune rules losses, and then Venus sitting in your second house is all about money and reflecting on your money. So you might have a situation in May where you lose money, and maybe you even realize, looking back at your past spending habits, maybe you spent money on something and you got scammed out of a certain amount, or you spent too much money on something, or somehow you lost money. So maybe you think about past instances when you lost money, and then in May, you might have an instance where you actually lose money through some sort of financial deal. Also, this is so significant for you, Taurus, just because 11th house is the house of gains. It's the house of, it's really this house that shows us what we gain from our career, 10th house. So you can really see how much money you make and what you gain from your career by looking at the 11th house and inspecting what is happening there. And so with Neptune here, and then having it square Venus, it represents maybe loss of gains. Maybe you thought you gained a lot from some sort of career endeavor, but you really didn't. And like I said, Neptune is illusions. So there can be this illusion around, okay, yeah, I'm gaining a lot from this. Like, yeah, I'm gonna do this whole financial, I guess, deal or financial endeavor, but then in May you realize, like, wait, that's a loss of money, that's an expenditure, it's not worth my time. Okay, so let's talk about your love life, because that's what we really want to know, right? So when it comes to your love life, we're still going to look at these same planets. So Venus is still sitting in your second, and then Neptune sitting in your 11th. So when it comes to Venus and your love life, and Venus being retrograde especially, in May you're really asking yourself, do these relationships I take part in offer any value? Again, second house at its core is about this sense of value, and especially our own self-value. How do we value ourselves? And then especially in the birth chart, we can see directly the 8th house is the house of intimate relationships. So until you have a valuable relationship with yourself, second house, then you can have a valuable intimate relationship with somebody else. So you're really contemplating and reflecting on whether or not you value yourself. Do the people you allow into your life in a romantic sense, do they align with your own values? As a Taurus, you're somebody who has a set of values and you're sticking to them. You're somebody who sticks to their word, who sticks to their own moral code. You're very sturdy and steady in what you believe. And maybe in May, you're kind of reflecting, like, what do I believe about myself? What are my values about myself? And how do I attract people based on that? And sometimes if your values are not set in place, then you just attract people who are just kind of random and don't really align with you ultimately. And so I feel for Taurus, you're going to be looking at relationships, current relationships and past relationships and future relationships from the perspective of investments. Second house at its core is about investing in things over the long term. And as a Taurus, I feel like you're really familiar with the kind of dynamic or technique of assessing people and then investing in them if you feel like they're worth your time. So I feel like you're really sitting in that energy in May and thinking about, like, wait, this person isn't worth my investment. This person isn't worth investing time or energy or love into. And I feel like that whole method of thinking is going to save you a lot of time in the long run. And this Venus retrograde is going to save you a lot of time in the long run, just because you're going to realize, like, wait, this person isn't worth, there's no profit in this relationship. Not to make relationships about money, but more so from like a metaphorical standpoint. Like, when you invest in things, you expect to gain or you expect to profit from it somehow. And so when it comes to relationships, I feel like what you gain from a relationship manifests as if that person supports your goals, if that person supports your self-esteem. Is that person a genuine match to you? Are they sincere? Are they honest? You're just going down your checklist and thinking, like, wait, this person, I don't know if they're capable of that. And so if you feel like a person isn't capable of supporting you or being a good match for you or being someone you can partner with long term, then you're not going to invest in them. And so you're really contemplating that whole dynamic of investing in people and whether or not you profit from it, and really having that almost money mindset and applying that same mindset to your relationship. So let's talk about this curveball you're going to be thrown in May. So like I said, on May 3rd and then again on May 20th, Neptune is squaring Venus. So this is where that like really messy, confusing energy comes from. And Neptune, like we talked about, is a malefic planet in astrology. It's a planet that represents loss and confusion and delusion and illusions. It also represents deception and lies too, and also hidden enemies. So when it comes to love, you might realize in May especially, somebody you loved or somebody that you were in a relationship romantically with isn't who you thought they were. Maybe they were somebody who was deceptive, someone who lied to you. And especially with this 11th house. 11th house represents social groups as well. And then second house is the house of self-worth and your own values. So maybe you're realizing like somebody kind of lied to you and gave this illusion that they did value you, or gave this illusion that they did align with your values, but they really didn't. And you might be realizing that like happened in the past, but also in May you might be confronted with that same dynamic. You might experience somebody lying to you in May, somebody not being who you think they are. That's just something to really watch out for with these kind of transits, because it does represent lying, illusion, and people not being very authentic or true to who you think they are. And also I will say that this kind of represents sort of like scammy energy. I don't know if I talked about that, but Neptune, again, it's like this kind of con artist energy. You can think about it like that. And then second house is the house of finances. Venus represents finance too. And then 11th house is the house of social media and internet in a general sense. So someone might try to scam you online or try to scam you in real life maybe, but just watch out for like scammy sort of characters or kind of con artist sort of people trying to take your money, deceive you. And that's why I really wanted to make this video, just to tell you guys, like, Neptune squaring Venus is like very sketchy energy, and you have to be aware of that, especially for you, Taurus, because it affects your money directly. So for daily updates during the month of May, you guys can head to my Instagram at astrokit and then subscribe to my channel so you don't miss my next video, and I'll see you, Taurus, in my next one. Hey Aries, so let's talk about the month of May for you, and specifically let's talk about your financial life and your love life in May. Most of you guys know in May, the events that are impacting those aspects of your life is Venus is going retrograde, and then it's also going to square Neptune. So the dates for that is on May 13th, Venus goes retrograde in Gemini, and then on May 3rd as well as May 20th, Venus squares Neptune. So there's this huge sort of messy theme going on, and we're gonna explain what that means for Aries, sun, moon, or rising. So let's really unpack this messiness and really get to the bottom of what's going on for you. So first, let's talk about your financial life, and then we'll talk about your love life after. So when it comes to your financial life, I have your birth chart here, Aries. And so we can see your financial life through Venus. So Venus is going to be retrograde in Gemini, of course, in your third house. And then we're going to talk about that Neptune square in a little bit, but let's talk about that Venus retrograde first. So what this means for your financial life is that you're really asking yourself and reflecting on whether or not you can make money in a creative way. Specifically, you're asking yourself how to make money in creative ways. You're asking yourself, what are creative ways to make money? The third house is all about this sense of creativity. And I really see the third house as this house that represents creating things. It's this sense of creation. And it carries kind of like this childish connotation. I feel like we talked about that in May, in your May predictions video. And I feel like third house carries this sort of like childish, inspired sort of energy. So with Venus being retrograde here, you're kind of having this moment where you're reflecting on how to make money, but in a way that is sort of childish, I guess, or in a way that is creative, this sort of way that isn't super conventional. Maybe it's not traditional, but still it is profitable for you. And it's really about this sense on reflecting about your own creative ideas and how your own creative ideas make you a lot of money. I feel like when it comes to manifesting money and creating money for ourselves, it really goes down to your ideas. What idea do you have that will make money? I feel like that's the core of money making, and I feel like the people who make the most money in life really think about the best money making ideas. So I really feel like you're going to be in that space in May, thinking about really like how your ideas translate to money and how you spend money in a way that is conducive to your own creativity and inspiration. Of course, when it comes to retrograde, it's a time to really reflect on your money, not really a time to like start new financial projects, because when you start new financial projects during like a Venus retrograde, it kind of backfires later. So you really have to be wary of spending new money or spending money on new things or spending large sums of money with a Venus happening in retrograde, and especially spending money on things that are kind of irrelevant. The third house does represent, I kind of think the third house has like knickknacks or things that aren't really, things that are more superficial and not too important. So in May, you kind of have that urge to spend money sort of erratically and not in a way that is conducive to your larger financial goal. So let's talk about the curveball you're going to be thrown in May. So this curveball is Neptune squaring Venus. So like I said, it's happening on May 3rd and then again on May 20th. So those dates and then the days around those dates is really when you're susceptible to some sort of financial loss. I will say this is significant for you just because Neptune is the planet that represents loss and confusion and deception and lies and illusions and hidden enemies too, right? And I feel like we talked about hidden enemies in your past prediction video. And so with this square happening when it comes to money, you might realize ways you have lost money, ways you have spent money in a way that was more so an expenditure rather than an asset. I feel like you're really thinking about that whole dynamic of things that are worthy of having and keeping for a long time versus things that are just, like I said, sort of like knickknacks or expenditures, things that don't really matter, but you want it at that moment. I feel like in May, you might deal with a situation where you spend money and it was just pointless. It was just a loss ultimately. And really be wary of being deceived financially by people. Now, the third house, I will say, does represent people that are in your immediate surroundings, like your peers, coworkers, brothers, sisters, cousins, people like that. Really be aware of people that might deceive you, even if they are like your brother, sister, cousin, peer, someone you see often, right? That's the third house is what the third house represents, is those people. Like I said, Neptune is hidden enemies. So it might be someone you thought was like your coworker, but they might deceive you when it comes to money. Okay, so let's talk about your love life. So this energy is super impactful on your love life. And when it comes to relationships and partnerships in May, you're really asking yourself, is the communication you have in that relationship healthy? So I don't think I said this earlier, but third house at its core is the house of communication. It's the house of exchanging ideas, exchanging information. And so when you have Venus here, it's all about how you exchange information with your love interest, how you exchange healthy communication styles with other people. And so with Venus being retrograde, you're reflecting on past partnerships and whether or not they had healthy communication, whether or not you were the one to communicate healthy with people, whether or not you exchanged honest information with people. It's all about this sense of exchanging and communication. So you're really reflecting on that topic. And then also in May, since this is retrograde, I will say that it does suggest some sort of miscommunication with people. So you might really experience a lot of miscommunication with people, and especially just like simple things, like maybe you sent a text and forgot one word in the text and then it starts a fight with someone. I can imagine things like that happening with Aries specifically. So let's talk about the curveball you're going to be thrown in May. So this curveball relates to Neptune squaring Venus, and like we talked about, that's happening on May 3rd and then again on May 20th. And so what that represents, this is such messy energy for you, Aries. I won't lie, because like we talked about, Neptune is all about deception and lies and hidden enemies too. And so you might have a lot of people trying to lie to you, people trying to sell you some sort of illusion, people trying to create an illusion of themselves, but they're actually very deceptive. And you really have to be like very aware of that, because this will happen, like I said, with the people that you're around the most, people you thought was your friend, people you thought was your coworker, somebody even like a cousin or brother might be a hidden enemy, which is Neptune, right? So you have to be aware of people lying and being deceitful towards you in relationships. And especially when it comes to communication, especially through text and talking and FaceTime, people will try to deceive you in May, and you have to kind of be aware of the truth, like we talked about, 9th house, and be aware of your own truth. And when you're aware of your own truth, people can't really deceive you because you know the truth ultimately. So for daily updates throughout the month of May, you guys can head to my Instagram at AstroKit and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss my next video. And I'll see you, Aries, in my next one.